Hello, this is Fred Haight speaking, and welcome to a presentation on the beautiful island of Iceland. I will strive to make it both informative but interesting and entertaining at the same time. Part of the entertainment will be me trying to pronounce Icelandic words. The photos will be mostly my own, but I'm not above lifting something from the internet if it serves the purpose. I'm going to call it Iceland: Volcanoes, Vikings, and Valhalla. Let's start with the volcanoes. The entire island was formed by volcanic activity, and it still goes on today. These are film shots from a 2014 eruption, and as you might guess, not taken by me. And this is a photograph of a famous 2010 eruption. The entire island is formed of lava, and it's amazing how many different forms lava can take, sometimes juxtaposed to one another. Lava accounts for the black sand beaches at Vik and Reynisfjara. I'd heard it was black, but I'd never imagined it could be that black. But it's ground up lava. Soft as any other sand, though. This is called the town in the lava, and as you can see, it really is. From lava mountain to lava beaches to lava plains, you gotta lava it. On that note, let's move on to the subject of Vikings. Iceland was settled between 870 and 930 AD, mostly by Norsemen, and they were Vikings. They're very proud of that heritage. You see it everywhere. It's easy to get caught up in the spirit. This is the famous Eric the Red, who had to flee Iceland and went off to found Greenland. And this is a statue of his son, Leif Erikson, or Leif the Lucky as we call him, the Christian Viking who discovered the Americas long before Columbus. This is a statue of the first guy dumb enough to move here, or I should say dumb enough to move and stay here, Ingolfur Arnarsson. Here he is with his wife. His statue's at the top of a hill. And here's a view looking down on the Reykjavik harbor from his statue. Iceland is one of the last habitable places on Earth to be settled, starting about 870 AD. Yet, by the year 1400, it had 60,000 people living there, which is a lot for those days. And I wondered, how could so many people move to a place so cold? But then I realized they come from Norway, and if you look at Norway on a map, most of Norway is further north than Iceland. It must have been a summer vacation spot for at least some of them. The statue of Leif Erikson stands in front of Hallgrímskirkja, the central Lutheran church in all of Iceland, at the top of a hill in Reykjavik. It was made by the American sculptor Alexander Calder and donated by the American people to Iceland in 1930 to celebrate the 1000th anniversary of the Alþingi, or Icelandic Parliament. About 930 AD, the people of Iceland formed a General Assembly, or Alþingi, and met in a central location, Thingvellir, which is now Thingvellir National Park. If you're going to Iceland and you take the Golden Circle tour, you will go to Thingvellir National Park. These buildings are at the place where the Alþingi actually met. Many of the Icelanders were themselves escaping oppression and had no desire of a king or an oligarchy. So the Alþingi was constituted of tribal chieftains from each area, representing each area, and two farmers accompanying each one of them. There were no elections, and everyone was immune to retribution or vengeance, grievances, and that kind of thing while the Alþingi was meeting. The Alþingi had its problem. It was decentralized, disorganized, and did not include women. But to have a parliament with no king and no nobility at that point in history is remarkable. They had no written language, and the only paid member of the Alþingi was the law speaker, whose job was to memorize all the laws of the country so that he could settle disputes. When Christians arrived in 1000 AD from recently converted Norway and demanded conversion, the story goes that the law speaker, pictured here, climbed under his covers, stayed there for a day to think about it, finally emerged and said, "Okay, we're Christians now, but it's still okay to worship the old gods, but do it in private." That's about the quickest and easiest conversion I ever heard of. This is Bishop Gudmundsson the Good, who was reported to have fought for the people. Written language now became part of the Icelandic experience. But they had another quick and easy conversion. When the Reformation and Protestantism took over large parts of Northern Europe, they just cut off the heads of the Catholics, and that was that. First instant Christians, then instant Lutherans. These wax figures, spelled W-A-X, are all from the Saga Museum, where they will let you take photographs and try on their clothing, although, my, that chainmail is heavy. The mention of the old gods brings me to my third point, Valhalla. The Hallgrímskirkja, which sits at the top of the hill in Reykjavik, is beautiful on the outside and on the inside. It's like a cathedral, including the fact that it has a magnificent organ. And here you see, I think, a somewhat Nordic-looking Jesus. These terraced layers are supposed to remind us of the basalt columns that we see all over Iceland, although they also remind me of ranks of pipe organs. Here are some of those basalt columns at Reynisfjara. The church dominates the area. You can see it from everywhere, yet the streets surrounding it are known as the neighborhood of the gods. "15 of the streets in that area are named after the ancient pagan Norse gods. This is the god Njord. I'd never heard of him. I guess that's maybe because he didn't make it into the comic books. It's a marvel that he didn't. Here's Odinsgata, or street. Next, you see the Cafe Loki, named after an evil god, which sits directly across from the front of the church and the statue of Leif Erikson. They specialize in traditional Icelandic food, some of which might also be characterized as evil, such as the fermented shark with the little red cross sticking out of it, or dried fish, which is a bit like chewing on asbestos. To me, this worship of the pagan pantheon seems a bit much. It would be like worshiping Zeus or Apollo today. And I have to remind myself that we English speakers named 3 days of our week after these characters. And I don't think I need to remind you which day comes between Wednesday and Friday. It has been reported that up till recently, the majority of the Icelandic population believed in elves and believed in them very strongly, strong enough to even build little teeny houses for them. Troll sightings have been reported, and you will see evidence of dwarves. This is Dwarf Cliff, first in a picture and then the actual cliff itself. I was amazed to read that J.R.R. Tolkien, author of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, spoke fluent Icelandic as well as Old Norse, and took many of the myths in his story from Iceland, and even some of the names, such as Gandalf. Now we will take a break from the history while I show exclusively my own photos taken in my drive all over Iceland. I'm going to start with all the beautiful little small towns that I saw, starting with the Snæfellsnes Peninsula on the west coast. I'll accompany the photos with a beautiful Icelandic hymn called Her himna smiður. Reynjusfjara is one of the most dangerous beaches in the world. The government puts up signs saying, "Don't turn your back on the ocean. Beware of deadly sneaker waves that come in several yards further than the normal waves and drag unsuspecting tourists into one of the strongest undercurrents in the world into freezing water. Most never make it back. Yet every year, tourists die." Before we move on, I realize that we have forgotten something, or I have forgotten something. It's not just volcanoes, Vikings, and Valhalla, or Lava Leif and Loki for short. I'd forgotten something. What could that possibly be? Oh, yeah, ice. It's called Iceland. And this is the way they spell their country's name. I kept thinking, where are all these islands? Iceland has many glaciers. They call them jokels. And if you hear someone talking about the local jokel, it's not their neighbor. Here we are at the foot of the Vatnajökull, or water glacier, which is the largest glacier in all of Europe. This area is called the Jökulsárlón, or the Glacier Lagoon. You see chunks of ice here which break off and form icebergs, admittedly small ones for this time of year, and then drift down to the ocean. That tiny spot in the water, by the way, is the head of a seal. See how quickly the ice moves by comparing these two photographs. That chunk there is photographed just a few minutes later, and it's on its way. And these small icebergs are on their way down to the ocean. I read a useful article called Visiting Iceland, Don't Be an Idiot, which warns you about the sneaker waves at the beach and also warns tourists not to walk out on the icebergs to try and get a better photo. Notice how blue the ice is. I'll come back to that. We met there and clambered on board a super jeep, vehicles designed for driving over glaciers, and that we did, and arrived at this narrow entrance to a magical ice cave. Notice how blue the ice is, and that the ice back at the lagoon is also blue. That's because it's compressed ice. Under glacial pressure, all the air bubbles have been squeezed out of it. So, like water, it absorbs the red end of the spectrum and reflects the blue. That's why the ocean appears blue. But in an ice cube from your refrigerator, there are too many air bubbles, so it does not appear blue. Glaciers form caves out of ice, and every year they're in a different place, and this one was melting, but was still good for a couple of more weeks, hopefully. Uh-oh, the cave entrance is filling in, and we had to dig our way out. To be honest, though, it looked better on film than it did in person. Notice how low the sun sits in the sky. At this time of the year, it does not get very high, and it's an eerie feeling. Early morning feels like late evening. This is approaching noon. There are many places in Iceland that look like you're on another planet. And for that reason, outer space movies and TV shows like The Game of Thrones are filmed here. Now we can return to the drive around the countryside with the Reykjanes Peninsula, where the capital Reykjavik is, but it's different because it's also a UNESCO geopark. Again, I found a beautiful Icelandic hymn written in the 20th century, but set to the words of national poet and theologian Hallgrímur Pétursson, after whom this great church is named. Keflavik is the airport town about 47 kilometers from Reykjavik. It's still fairly small, though. You see these types of figures all over the place. I believe they're looking out to sea for all the lost ships. There's a lot of ships that sank there. Most Icelanders speak English very well. That's partially accounted for by the fact that they have a first-class universal educational system, but perhaps also by the fact that for decades Keflavik had a U.S. military base, pictured here at Asbru. And during World War II, the U.S. practically occupied Iceland with 60,000 soldiers, and you still see signs of it, at least in Keflavik. In the center of the peninsula, you will find the bridge over two continents. The great tectonic plates that separate the continents, the Eurasian plate and the North American plate, meet right here. And you can stand on this bridge if you like and watch them pull apart at the rate of 2 centimeters a year. On one side, you're essentially in North America, and on the other side, you're essentially in Eurasia. You can travel there faster than you thought, huh? If you go on one of the Golden Circle tours, you will certainly go to Geyser and see Stoker, the geyser that still fires. And please spare me the adolescent humor about Stroker. And on the Don't Be an Idiot theme, you will also see warnings that what seems like a cool water flow is close to boiling point, and you shouldn't walk on that land. It really doesn't look too solid, and if your foot sinks down, you could be in hot water indeed. You might have to jump in the nearby falls at Gullfoss to cool off. But in the middle of nowhere in the Reykjanes Peninsula is something I find far more impressive: Gunavur, Iceland's largest steaming mud hole. And in this case, you really, really do want to stick to the pathway. The water down deep is 300 degrees centigrade. That's 3 times boiling point. Iceland gets 12% of its power from hydroelectric. They have a lot of waterfalls, and the rest comes from geothermal. It wasn't always that way. They used coal at first, but gradually their engineers mastered the technology of geothermal. This is the site of one of Iceland's big geothermal power plants. The pipelines carry the hot water over to these plants where the water turns turbines and produces electricity. At those temperatures, ocean water is necessary to cool it. But the hot water is also used for direct heating. The water in this radiator is not heated electrically, it's just hot. This is Perlan, or the Pearl, site of 4 basins which hold Reykjavik's precious hot water supply. And of course, they built a fancy restaurant on top and an observation deck, so you can go up and get some beautiful panoramic views of the city. There didn't used to be trees in Iceland, but they've planted a few now to try and spruce up the place. Though there was not much snow when I was there, I saw very few snow plows. Major roads like this between Keflavik and Reykjavik are heated geothermally, as are the sidewalks in Reykjavik. Of course, it helps to be sitting on top of a volcano and only have 300,000 people. The famous tourist attraction, the geothermal pool called the Blue Lagoon, is right near Grindavik, a city we've already visited in this peninsula. It's been a long presentation. Let's relax and meditate in the water to, maybe 6 or 7 hours of Tibetan bowl music before we resume. Okay, are you relaxed? Good. Let's push on. A bit more history. Around 1272 AD, Iceland came under the rule of the Kingdom of Norway. Around 1400, the Kingdom of Norway kind of fell apart and the Kingdom of Denmark took over. So they came under Danish rule. This is the Danish embassy in Reykjavik today that you're looking at. In the 13th century, Snorri Sturluson, warlord and poet, began writing the sagas in the Icelandic language, not Latin, and about ordinary people, not princes and knights, since they didn't have any. The sagas are not a snore. In fact, they love them so much they'll paint them in English on the side of a wall in a small town. The heroes of these sagas did accomplish amazing things, though. This guy is doing three things at once: using his shield to protect his friend, severing his enemy's leg with his sword, and jumping up to avoid a thrust by another enemy. Batman had nothing on these guys. In the 19th century, patriotism and nationalism grew under the leadership of John Sigurdsson. This is his statue in Reykjavik today. And the Danish felt they had to make some concessions. Here in front of Government House is a statue of the Danish king on his 1874 visit to Iceland, the one and only visit ever made by a Danish king to Iceland, offering the people of Iceland their very own constitution. Problem is, it really didn't make them independent. Icelanders relish the story of the little boy who thought that the statue commemorated the man who was the best newspaper seller. The nationalist spirit continued to grow. This is called Culture House, and inside is the National Library, first founded in 1906. On the one side, they have what they call the Long Wall with so many books in it. My God, Listowel has a bigger library than that. And on the other side, you see the reading desks. In 1918, at the end of World War I, Iceland was granted independence, but still shared the Danish crown, Danish foreign policy, and the Danish court as the final court of appeals. All of this may remind Canadians of something. True independence did not come till 1944, towards the end of World War II. Denmark was occupied by the Nazis, and Iceland declared total independence. Here we see the Icelandic Parliament. 1944 may seem late in the game, but hey, it puts them ahead of Canada in 2017. It would not be a complete video if I did not include a stroll, a leisurely stroll around the beautiful city of Reykjavik with all of its wonderful buildings. I will set it to music which exudes warmth while it seems to shiver. That's City Hall at the end of this pond. Iceland has one of the most unusual naming systems in the world. There are no permanent surnames. You take your father's name, first name, or since 1991 you can also pick your mother's, and add a son or daughter to it. So my name is Fred Haight, but I would be Fred Donaldson. For instance, Eric the Red was Eric Thorvald's son, but his son, Leif the Lucky, was not named Thorvald's son. His son was Leifr, Eric's son. Must be difficult to trash records. These mariners are looking out to sea for all the lost ships. There are plaques naming every one of them there. City Hall, the Old Harbor, the place where Reagan and Gorbachev met to try and stop the SDI, Lake Jorthog, a kind of a central meeting place, the bridge from City Hall across the lake or pond, there's an unusual sense of humor. Here is a bar called Lead Us Into Temptation. Maybe it was founded by Wall Street bankers. More on that in a bit. And the ugliest pizza in town with their own version of the food pyramid. There are no dangerous animals in Iceland. If a polar bear somehow makes it on shore, they kill it because they know that polar bears eat people. Here is a view from inside City Hall. Everyone seemed to get a laugh out of this statue. You could call it the Great Blockhead or Lava for Brains, but I think all of us have felt like that at one time or another. Icelanders have a long-standing friendly relationship with the U.S., and they love everything retro-American. They even have a rock and roll museum, and I swear that this was on a street called Burger Joint Street. But what's that thing on the shoreline that looks like a lump of lava? My friend Scott Tanner helped prepare me for this trip with a carefully annotated photo album. At the time that he went there, the Hallgrímskirkja was the undisputed center of Reykjavik. But now, I'm sure Scott would be happy to find out that there is a rival to it. From a distance and on an overcast day, which is normal in Iceland, it does appear rather lava-like. But as you get closer to it, you realize that the facade is made of glass. This is Iceland's new symphony hall, Harpa. Get closer, even in overcast weather, and tiny specks of color will appear. Then, when the sun comes out, it gets really interesting. Bright colors appear only in certain spots because they are fitted with a certain dichromatic glass meant to show blue and magenta. The colors change with the sun, but also as you walk around it. You can see on one side that the glass facade is made of three-dimensional solids that they call quasi-brick. Looking at them from below, you can kind of get an idea of their shape and how they're stacked. Everything about the hall is Icelandic, and these solids are meant again to remind us of the basalt columns. Other parts of it were made of two-dimensional quasi-brick. I don't think quasi-brick is the best name. Here's inside the Symphony Hall, where there are many halls and rooms and functions, and the view of the harbor through this two-dimensional glass is spectacular. The building is placed right on the beautiful Reykjavik harbor. Who could ask for anything better? But there was a scandal surrounding Harpa. It was a huge, ambitious project that included a symphony hall, a convention center, a hotel, and a new headquarters for Landesbank, the Icelandic bank that, under the leadership of Wall Street, had really led the country into temptation. When the crash hit in 2008, it was a shock. Iceland had never seen anything like this, and all construction stopped, and a half-finished symphony hall was left exposed to the elements. Thousands of angry citizens demonstrated at Harpa, banging their pots and pans. Many of them did not wish to finish it, and others had I think, a wise idea to turn it into a prison for the bankers who had caused the problem. The government of Iceland and the city of Reykjavik stepped in, pointing out that it would cost more to shut it down than to finish it, and with the help of individuals like Vladimir Ashkenazi, who was quite involved, it was finished. Since then, millions of people have visited and enjoyed Harpa. Here you see it at night, reflecting the night light, and here you see it at night with the inside light shining outwards. That's quite a difference between that and this, but it's the same building. It's one of the most beautiful concert halls I've ever seen, and considering that this was Reykjavik's first concert hall, you've come a long way, baby. I'm going to end on an unusual subject, picnic tables. Icelanders are concerned about having enough leg space, as you see here, and they have to take the prize for the most scenic and panoramic places to put a picnic table. They're at all the scenic viewpoints. Sometimes there's just one table, nobody using it, at least in winter, and several thousand acres all to yourself. If you're claustrophobic, Iceland is a great place to go.